Honestly, in the abyss of pretty mediocre play this weekend, we did get some very interesting stuff, but honestly, I was more intrigued by Ganon shredding it almost 800 feet on Instagram, as well as Kendrick's new album, both a little bit more interesting than this event, and two-time world champion Isaac Robinson getting married. But it did raise some very interesting questions about the whole feasibility of tour life, and honestly, if getting a tour card is actually a good thing, because it's not incredibly clear. So with that, let's get into it. And if you want to snag a great deal on the Gyropalooza box or some mystery boxes on my site, just go down to wildonesdiscgolf.com or just scan this QR code. So just for some context, because you may not know that much about this entire event, the Q Series is the replacement for Silver Series. It was ultimately kind of a wash, kind of feels like we didn't need this. And the reason why I say this is because so many players in this Q Series finale are touring players that play almost every single event. So the fact that they were playing for a tour card for next year didn't really make sense to me, with basically everybody of relevance playing at Worlds this year, which did include the winner of this event, Leah Senegini, who actually went plus 50 in Worlds. Very rough finish. Literally almost 70 strokes behind Evelina. And then you have Micah Groth, who is like the face of all the PDGA ads. I kind of thought he was just a shoo-in, but I guess he didn't actually have a tour card, despite getting top 30 at Worlds and a top 25 at Beaver State. And so before we even get to the recap of all this, I kind of feel like this whole event doesn't really make sense. Like, it was trying to raise up all these lower name players, but Luke Sampson and Micah Groth are players that I see weekly. I mean, definitely not getting like top 10 finishes, but overall, I feel like these players have been kind of a mainstay. And to me, I thought the Q Series was players that you've never heard of, that aren't really on tour, but they want to get on tour. That was very much not the case. Feels like everybody here has already made a name for themselves. They already have sponsors. They're already pretty well established. But maybe it just goes to show that you need a lot more than just playing decent at some events. You kind of need the assurance that the tour card provides. On the flip side though, there are players like Emily Weatherman who just secured Rookie of the Year, and she had this to say, and it all kind of feels like, yes, this is the potential for what you could do in a season. Literally not even knowing if you're playing a full season, and then you just shred, play dominant, win an event, and truly make a name for yourself. But it feels like, especially in MPO, that is kind of tough when there is so much competition.
For all of the hard work that they put in, two of my competitors for welcoming me onto the tour with complete open arms. It's been really great here, and if anybody's wondering whether they should or should not try out this lifestyle, try out this career, my advice is that if you had the chance to do it, do it.
And you may be asking, well, what is a freaking tour card? That was a question that I thought I knew until I looked it up, and I was like, oh wow, I do not know anything about this. So just for some additional context, and let me tell you, it was hard to even find this context. I don't even know if this is still the current perks of a tour card, because it was very hard to find out what is actually a tour card. So this is coming from the 2023 tour card PDF. And what's crazy is that when I tried to find out what the current tour card does, I stumbled upon a disc golf scene event where you could register for a tour card, and all of that just seems so jank, but I think that's how they're currently doing it. You sign up for the event 2025 tour card, and that is how you register for all this, and then you get emails based upon your registration of that. I don't know, it seems wild, but according to the only documentation that I could find that went into any amount of detail, this is what you currently get. And also, it could be something that constantly fluctuates, so they don't actually want to make it public what you get and what you don't get. As it stands on this current document, it costs $1,000 for a full season, with each event costing $50. So a total of 20 events equates to that $1,000 cost. So before I even looked this up, I kind of just assumed you bring value to the event, so the fact that you have a tour card means you get free entry to every event. That is very much not the case. You still very much need to pay for your entry. It is just at a much more reduced rate, because the average entry is about $300, with the bigger events costing $400. So if you do assume this basis that you don't bring value to the event, you're just a competitor at the event, it kind of makes sense, but still a little bit weird. But here is some of the nitty gritty. You get your own parking, transportation, locker room, private bathroom, event security, a privacy tent, autograph areas, which I'm sure exists even if you don't have the tour card, facilities for warm-up, as well as health and wellness opportunities, which I'm sure does not mean healthcare. This is crazy. You get your own haircuts with an on-site barber, as well as a sponsored product program to try to sample out products from the DGPT partners. So all this feels like just total fluff. I wouldn't really want that even if I was a professional athlete. So to me, I think the only benefits is that you get guaranteed entry, and it only costs $50 per event, which is a massive reduction to the price. But once you see that the tour card isn't actually that valuable, it's just kind of like a nice to have, it really shifts the paradigm as to the whole point of the Q Series. With all these qualifying events throughout the year that you try to make it to the finals, and then in the finals you can qualify to get a tour card, but once you see that it's not that big of a deal, it ultimately just feels like, what's the point here? Because the top 90 MPO and the top 50 FPO players get it based on the tour standings. And so with all that ambiguity and context added, it's very clear why no one really watched this, and this is probably probably not the best event if you've been a player there. I'm sure it's hype, I'm sure it's fun, I'm sure it is very electric to try to see if you can qualify for the tour card, but as an onlooker, besides Leah Senegini, Harry Chase, and Mika Groth, ultimately nobody else was truly that interesting to watch, especially with the entire tournament being the same layout, so all of MPO actually played FPO T-pad. So for FPO, it was basically a battle between Hannah Stevanovic, Alexis Kerman, and Leah Senegini. Now at one point league card was all tied, but it was very clear that Leah Senegini was popping off with one of the best rounds of her entire life, ending it with a 975 from chase card, with honestly some of the best putts I've seen all year, starting off the very first hole of the final round with a 105-foot throw-in, oh my goodness, and then basically never gave up from that point with a humongous 42-foot birdie on hole 8. And so despite round 2 being nearly a full disaster with 2 doubles, 7 bogeys, and 4 out of bounds, she cleaned it up very nicely with a 15-stroke improvement in her round. And this was at a point where she really needed to dominate as chase card if she wanted to get that tour card. And so she finishes at +9, which like I said is why this event was not the most interesting, because I feel like the top 10 FPO players in normal play could have beaten her, but that's not the point of this. She still wins with Alexis Kerman fighting off Hannah and Jennifer Smiley. And let me tell you, the last few holes were just a near disaster because the coverage not only was a little bit blurry, but we had players losing their disc, almost had to re-tee at a point where they were all fighting for the win. And then just when you thought some players were going to birdie, they missed like a 15-foot putt. And so you knew it was not going to be a great finish, but it was going to be a finish nevertheless. And so we moved to hole 18, where the entire league card intentionally throws out of bounds and all takes a bogey, which made Brian Earhart very upset, but also it was hilarious to watch because this is like the most important tournament of their lives and they're all intentionally throwing OB, showing how bad the course design was. But as a viewer, I just thought it was all kind of hilarious and fun. But the conclusion was Alexis Kerman and Leah Senegini taking down the tour card. But then on MPO, it was a 9-day difference with basically no holes not being birdied or eagled, with a 45-stroke improvement from the top FPO player. It was a battle between Luke Sampson, Harry Chase, Jerry Lawson, Gideon Drake, and Mika Groth. And like I said earlier, most of these names I've heard before. I've seen them at pretty much every event, so it makes me a little bit confused. Like, if they don't get the tour card, are they not going to play at any events next year? It seems like obviously they still are, but maybe it's just a logistical thing and they don't want to pay $300 to get into some of these events. Maybe that's what's going on, but I'm almost certain no matter what happens, Luke Sampson will be playing next year. And a very interesting stipulation is that the 4th through 8th players get a silver tour card, which means they can go to 6 out of 20 events in the 2025 season. So with that said, it looked like Groth was probably going to run away with it. We have definitely seen him more than pretty much everybody else on the list, so it was no surprise that he did kind of walk it in with only a 9 under, which was 10-16. Feels kind of low, but also on an FPO layout definitely makes sense. But before we get to who didn't make it, the player who shined like nobody else in the final round was Harry Chase, which I thought sounded very familiar, and then I remembered, yes, he was the one that nearly beat Simon at a local B tier in Warren, Massachusetts, so it's definitely no surprise that he was fighting for the win here. Ultimately came just a little bit short against Micah, but he still wins that tour card with a 2nd place. And then on chase card, Gideon Drake was lighting it up, going 11 under through 14 holes. It looked like he was probably going to make a podium finish, but then gets a couple of unlucky breaks in the last 2 holes, then pars out, putting him just out of position of podium finish. And a very similar story happened with Luke Sampson, so despite having an 11 under, it just was not enough to make the cut, and so he finishes 2 strokes behind 3rd place, securing his silver card, but I'm sure for him, he was not looking for that. He was trying to get that full tour card, but so that means that Jason Lawson on league card made just enough of a push in the final round to secure another tour card. And overall, his play looked really good as well. There honestly were so many good shots in the final round for MPO that it was very fun to watch. I will say I wasn't glued to my screen, but it was still fun. But so overall, where does this Q series stand? It feels like it was trying to replace Silver Series, and it just didn't really make the mark that it was trying to be. Ultimately, if you don't stream it, no one really cares about it, and they didn't even stream the first round of this event, so it really feels like they didn't care. It feels like Mahmood didn't care. It feels like no one really cared. And so honestly, as a viewer, why should I care? I do feel like the announcers, Terry and Nate, were very professional. They commentated it like any other event, which made it a lot more interesting, but overall, I feel like the future of this event just doesn't really know its place, and it feels a little bit pointless when we could just extend the tour card to a few more players, which ultimately kind of feels like what the result of this entire tournament was. But a major issue is, what is the point of being a 52nd FPO player? Like, I know Leah was talking about her sponsors when she won, but if you are an FPO player that's so far down the list, what is the value that you're trying to bring to the tour? It feels like margins are getting slimmer and slimmer for these sponsors, and so they're probably not going to be promoting players that are not top 10 finishers, as bad as it sounds, because that is just the reality of the market. There is not enough money to really support all these edge case players that are good but not great enough to be in contention, and so the feasibility just doesn't really make sense. Which really not good enough to make it to the tour. Getting a tour card isn't really going to do a lot for you. You're just going to finish last, paying $50 for every event, And of course, living van life for a year, it sounds fun, but the feasibility to make a living on tour just doesn't really seem to be viable. And so you're left with this kind of harsh decision of you are not good enough, you probably won't be good enough, sponsors are not going to sponsor you, at least probably not as much as you need to be making it full-time on tour. And so it feels like for the first time in many years, being a sponsored touring player is not very good at all. There was points where we had so many sponsorships popping up left and right, and now it feels like it's kind of a ghost town because all these companies are just trying to fight to stay afloat, and they cannot afford sponsoring a player that is not even relevant, which is harsh. It's obviously not what people want to hear, but if you are finishing 30th every weekend, there is just not enough value to really make it as a touring player, at least in the current market. So with that said, what do you guys think? Do you think it's viable? Do you think it's going to be working out for these players? Or do you think getting a tour card as a player that finishes 30th, 40th every weekend is worth it? Personally, for me, if I didn't have to worry about money at all, I wouldn't really care if I finished dead last. I still would love to be playing these events week after week, but I can definitely see why it's not really going to work long term for these edge case players, and so their viability is kind of up in the air. But with that, what do you guys think? I'd love to know. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.
Chasing a dream.